Hi, welcome back to the second installment of the first song from the video novel Ballads, A Tinker's Dozen. If you're ready, we'll begin. Martha didn't know what to say. To hide her nervousness, she turned around in her seat to see what the back seat of the car was like. Piled haphazardly all over the seat were more guns than Martha had ever seen before in one place. Long guns and pistols and enough ammunition for an army. "See anything you like, Martha?" Silkie almost crooned. Martha had been raised in the country and had been hunting for varmints and victuals since she had been old enough to hold her granny's 410. She had brought home quail, prairie chickens, turkeys, and pheasant almost as soon as she had learned to shoot. Later on, there was deer, elk, and antelope. She learned to fish in the rivers and gig frogs in the ponds. She knew her way around the tools in the back seat. "There's a nice little 20-gauge shotgun and a 32 pistol, Silkie," she answered. "But why are the shotguns sawed off?" Silkie laughed. "In case anyone wants to stop me from getting my money. Let's go get some now." Martha reached back and grabbed the pistol. It was a little automatic Colt with pearl grips. She slipped out the magazine and checked it. 8 rounds. She slid it back in, checked the safety, and asked, "Where's your money, honey?" with a little smile. "Just down the road a piece," he said. "Down the road a piece." Silkie put his foot to the floor and the Ford sped west. After about 3/4 of an hour, they pulled into the little town of Bennington. They passed the depot of the Kansas Pacific and turned right, past the general store, the city hall, the Methodist church, the Catholic church, and the 2-room schoolhouse. 1 room for grades 1 through 4 and the other for the higher grades. Next to the school was a doctor's office and a dentist. Across the street stood a 6-room hotel, and finally, the First National Bank and Trust of Bennington, its neoclassical Corinthian columns and a marble pediment featuring 3 draped figures, trust, integrity, and prosperity, a slight nod to the United States Supreme Court building it was modeled after. Silkie pulled up to the sidewalk at the bank's front door, beside a dappled mare tied up to a hitching post. He reached into the back seat and handed Martha the shotgun and a handful of shells. He took a double-action Colt revolver and a Colt .380 automatic, loaded them and put them in the pockets of his jacket. Then he reached back and pulled a .30-06 Browning automatic rifle into the front seat with him and Martha. He reached back and took 2 20-cartridge magazines for the rifle, putting one into the gun and the other into his pocket. Silkie turned to Martha, kissed her quickly on the cheek, and asked, "Ready, baby?" Martha nodded and smiled, too nervous to speak. "Then let's get my money, honey," he said, and hopped out of the car, leaving the motor running and the door open. Martha slid out of the car and left her door open, too. Silkie bowed and swept his arm toward the door, a gentleman asking his lady to precede him. Martha opened the door to the bank and stood beside the marble-topped table where depositors could fill out their slips. Behind her, Silkie walked boldly into the bank's lobby, turning to close the door behind him, turned the lock on the door, and pulled down the shade over the glass. And then he turned to attend to business. "Don't move a muscle, please, ladies and gentlemen," Silkie shouted, as smooth as a carnival barker, calling the rubes to see the tattooed lady. "Put your hands up and don't make a sound. I'm here to withdraw some money." A woman next to Martha at the table squeaked, and when Silkie put his finger to his lips and shook his head no, she grabbed her little daughter. An older man at the left-hand teller's window, there were only 2, clutched at his chest and fell to the floor, fainting or the victim of angina pectoris. The bank manager hurried over from his desk to aid the fallen man. Silkie stepped up to the manager and pulled him away from the prostrate customer. "Tell your teller to pull all of the bills into a bag and give it to me," he said, sticking the barrel of the BAR into the man's ample stomach. "Yes, sir," the manager stammered. The teller's eyes were as big as saucers, and he hurried to do just what Silkie had demanded. Within 2 minutes, he handed a bulging bag to the robber. "Now get down on the floor, everyone," Silkie ordered. And when the customers and the employees seemed to move like sap on a cold winter morning, Silkie gave them a little something to encourage them to hurry. He fired off one of the BAR's clips into the ceiling of the bank's lobby. As plaster fell to the floor, so did people in the bank. It was thrilling, and Martha could feel her heart pounding in excitement and other parts of her body responding as well. "Don't anybody move for 5 minutes," Silkie told them, "or I'll come back in and fill you so full of holes that you'll look like Swiss cheese." And Martha's, man, She liked the sound of that in her mind, turned and offered her his arm to escort her out to their waiting automobile. The two walked out of the bank together and got into their car. Silkie tossed his guns and the bag of money into the back seat, closed his door, and leaned over for a kiss from Martha. She closed her eyes and felt her lips touch his, and Silkie backed up and tore out of town. Silkie drove south for a while until he came to a bridge that crossed a meandering little creek. The Saline River, he told Martha. Right after the bridge, there was a little dirt road to the right. Silkie turned onto it and floored it, twisting and bouncing about for a mile until just ahead Martha saw a little cabin that might have been painted once, maybe, next to a weather-beaten barn. Silkie pulled up to the barn door, got out, and opened the door. "Slide over, honey," he yelled to Martha, "and drive her inside." Martha did as she was told. After she had driven the car into the old barn, she turned off the engine, got out, and walked to the door. Silkie pulled her into his arms and spun her around, pulling the barn door closed as Martha turned again to face him. Silkie took her by the hand and ran toward the cabin, pushing the door open and pulling Martha inside. There was a table, a couple of rickety chairs, a counter with a basin on it in front of a window, some shelves filled with dishes and cups, and a wood stove with a tin coffee pot sitting on a round burner cover, and over in a corner bed covered by a patchwork double wedding ring quilt. Silkie pulled Martha over toward the bed. He didn't have to do much pulling. She threw herself onto the quilt before he could get to it. Silkie stood by the bed looking down at Martha. He slipped off his jacket and then bent to untie his shoes. He slipped them off and then slipped his suspenders off his shoulders. His pants dropped to the floor. He kicked them away, and he unbuttoned his shirt, tossing it on top of the pants on the floor. Silkie wore maroon silk boxers, maroon garters to hold up those green and blue argyle socks, and to Martha's giggling surprise, no undershirt. His bare chest reminded Martha of Clark Gable, and it happened one night. He was so handsome. Silkie threw himself onto the bed and onto Martha. Martha was a farm girl and had seen more than a few hogs making bacon and had spent more than a few summer nights in the hay with some of the boys she had known from church and school, but she had never been with a man, so she let Silkie take her where he wanted to go. Martha helped Silkie take off her dress and her camisole and her knickers. He was excited and very passionate, and when he got where he wanted to go, well, as quickly as he drove that Ford. And right after that, Silkie fell asleep. And while he slept, Martha held Silkie, softly stroked his back, and petted his beautiful blonde hair.